Hi everybody, Justin Weber, Amps and Sound. Today we're sharing our latest build. So last video you saw I built a Cornscala, which for many years was sort of my speaker of choice. It was pairing a 15-inch woofer, much like the Klipsch Cornwall, with the biggest, best horns that I could find and the best drivers that I could find. With the help of Dave Harris and Fastlane Audio, we started revisiting the idea of how to make the cabinets smaller and smaller. In California, or at least in my home, in my area, our rooms aren't as big, and the width of a Cornscala or a Cornwall is difficult to accept for most families. So we started thinking about how could we really make use of a different driver, and the K24, which is the pro version of the K22, which is in the Heresy, was a really good choice. We'd seen how well it had performed, and the K24 is either identical or remarkably similar to the 12-inch woofers that are used in the Jubilees. Used correctly, it goes really low, and when going from a 12-inch woofer to going from a 15-inch woofer that gets down to about 44 hertz, truthfully, to a 12-inch woofer that gets down to about 34 hertz. Now, it's not quite as effortless sounding perhaps, but it's faster and it digs deeper. And if you have a small to moderate sized room, anything under 20 by 20, it probably outperforms a normal sized Cornscala while being significantly narrower. So that was the real benefit to it. So I'm going to show you how to build one of these and what we think of it, but I wanted to go over the component pieces because I wanted to show you the pieces installed in the speaker, but I want to talk to you about each of my design choices, how you can mimic it, and the why. So the more I learn, the more I extend to you. Hopefully the more you learn and extend to others, and we all build better speakers as a result. So here we have sort of my mid-range horn of choice. It is sort of compact yet bigger than even the mid horn that's used in the Cornwall 5 or Cornwall 4. So it's made by Fatale. It's the LTH 142, and it's an ABS horn. What's lovely about it is it uses an Elliptrax design, so it's an conical elliptical horn with a Tractrix flare. So it's got really good imaging, probably some of the best imaging horns you can get. All have Tractrix design dispersions. Why we like rectangular shaped horns and elliptical horns is that you have a wide dispersion through here, and yet you're controlling the vertical directivity so that you're not bouncing sound waves to your ceiling or to your floor, but sending out a really wide sound stage. Now, in stock form, this is a pretty good horn. How to improve it inexpensively is that it has some resonance, it has some ringing. Metal horns, any horn that isn't 3/4 inch MDF or plywood is going to have a ringing effect to it or a resonance. How we control that is I bought Dynamat from Amazon. I dynamatted the whole outside of the horn. It makes it just completely dead and inert. Because I didn't want anybody to pay great notice to me doing this, I then took matte black flat spray paint and spray painted the whole outside of the horn so it blends in. So if someone opens it up, they don't start asking questions, they just appreciate the sound quality for what it is. So why this horn? On its own, it can go from 500 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz, which means that you can use it as a two-way really effectively. That's not what we're doing today, but you could and should, and it works great, and you'd be very happy if you did. The bracket, now, you don't have to get this bracket. You could just as easily take a 1x2 or a 1 by 1.5 piece of wood, put it right underneath the driver to control some of its weight. This is completely true. However, Michael Kreitz of Kreitz Speakers, makes this beautiful L bracket, and they come in a 1.4 inch driver, which is what this horn is, and they come in a 2-inch driver version. And for like 25 bucks, buy yourself two of them. You'll be really happy you did. It comes with a gasket, so the driver on one side has a foam gasket. It interfaces the L bracket, L because of its shape, transferring all its weight into the brace that we put in the cabinet. And then you put the gasket between the horn and the L bracket to make a nice seal. So if you see on the inside, now a little trick that I do is I take the rubber gasket and I take a black marker and I marker it all black, because otherwise it's orange, and when you look at it you may see just a hair of it and be bothered. So one of the best things you can do is kind of camouflage it by making it all black. The driver of choice, the Radian 745 Neo PE. Radians are made in Anaheim, not far from one of my offices that I work at, and I remember the original owner, super nice man, incredibly smart. Radians are a fantastic choice, and if you're buying a Radian, you're buying an American-made product, made in Anaheim, California, and absolutely a remarkably good product. And this goes down to 500 hertz very, very easily, and goes all the way up to 20,000 kilohertz. It's an aluminum diaphragm. It could have been titanium, doesn't much matter. If it's a Radian, it's a really good product. They make a slightly less expensive version that uses a ferrite magnet, which would look like this. And I didn't go for that because this just looks better, it works well, it's slightly lighter, and I like that I can't nick the magnet and chip it. So it's been a proven choice, and I tend to use what works over and over again. So this would work perfectly fine, this horn and driver combination, as a two-way. But that's not what we're doing today, and I'll tell you the whys. Next, we have the Fatale horn. This is a 1-inch horn now. Now, it's their biggest 1-inch horn. Lots of people use this just as a mid-range, like a two-way. I have found that bigger the horn, the bigger the soundstage. So, you know, this is a tweeter. This is a very overbuilt, fancy tweeter for me. And I wanted to pair it with the biggest horn I could give it, to give it the biggest soundstage, to throw the greatest depth to my soundstage and most air to the speaker I could. Now, the horn in question is actually cast aluminum. This thing doesn't resonate. It needs no dampening. It is a beautiful piece of horn that's braced on its own to stop resonance, and it's kind of perfect just as it is. Now, the driver in question, you can say, Justin, what are you using for a driver? So the driver in question is made by Parts Express or Dayton. Now, the original idea of this driver came from a company called Selenium, which was out of Brazil, that got bought by JBL and is now part of the JBL Harman Group. And it was known as the 220 Ti with a titanium diaphragm. Everybody and their mother loved this driver. It's still available. It's a fantastically good choice. It's like a $50 compression driver that's indestructible, where the Radian is like a $350, $400 compression driver individually. So for this $50 compression driver with a titanium diaphragm, you cross it like 1200 hertz and it'll go all the way up to 20,000 kilohertz. Lots of people built a speaker called the EconoWave, which was to take an 8-inch or bigger boxed speaker, and you add a horn like this and a driver like this in a fairly simple crossover. A guy named Zilch from Audio Karma designed a really good crossover for it. If you guys want the crossover, I can give you the schematic. Anyway, so EconoWaves were super famous because you could take like an audio acoustic research AR1, AR3, or a Dynaco A25, which, you know, had a good woofer, but a kind of a terrible mid-range tweeter, comparison to modern performing drivers. Take this horn and this compression driver and you revolutionize it, and you have a box speaker that has reasonably good bass and has the speed and dynamics that only horns offered. So why did Parts Express copy the Dayton 220 Ti, or copy the Selenium 220 Ti? What they did, which was, I think, cooler. So the 220 Ti, some people would argue, if you weren't using it as a two-way wide bandwidth driver but wanted to use it as a tweeter, the titanium can be a little grating on the ear. They had the smart idea of using a mylar diaphragm that didn't have titanium in it, so it was just mylar, and it was infinitely more forgiving to the ear. Now, it wasn't perhaps as fast, less pistonic, but it was really, really durable. You could literally just swap out the diaphragm if you wanted to. And it was really good in PA, public address applications, without hurting your ear. So my friend Russ Stratton, I was talking about how I used to love this driver, couldn't get it, and he had a stash of 4. So I'm using a pair of the Dayton version of the 220 Ti with a mylar diaphragm that was gifted to me by Russ Stratton. That was super awesome and a good friend to do so. Next we have our crossover. So I know many people have said Al of ALK Engineering is retired. Sort of. Al is intending to continue to sell products, but he's going to build them first. He doesn't like having a wait list. With the global supply chain difficulties, having wait lists and not being able to get all the parts you need is a good way to give an older adult a lot of stress, and he didn't feel like having the stress anymore. So what do we have here? Why are we using what Al would call affectionately his universal network? So it's a first order on the woofer, second order on the mid-range, third order on the tweeter. What you have here, though, that's so darn important, sets it apart from a lot of other crossovers, is it's adjustable. So this autoformer, big ass inductor, has taps so that you can set it for 12, 15, 18, 9, 6, 3 decibels of attenuation. And then on the back side, you can set it for 0, 1, or 2. So you can go 3 and 0 is 3 dB of attenuation. You can go 3 and -1, which is 2 dB of attenuation, 3 and -2, which is 1 dB of attenuation. So you can actually really move through setting the balance between your woofer's efficiency and your mid-range's efficiency via the autoformer. So if you took, as an example, hypothetically, this woofer that we'll get to in a minute is a 94 dB efficient woofer. Nowhere near as efficient as the 15-inch Kappa 15C that we use, but it's still pretty darn efficient, and I'm willing to give up 4 dB efficiency for a cabinet reduction like we have. In addition, you have 112 dB efficient compression driver. So you do 94 minus 112, you'd come up with a number, let's call it 17, because that's where I voiced this last time I built it. And so we would set it for 18 on the back, right there. And then on this side, so it's 18 on this side here, and on this side it says -2. 18 minus 2, so I have this set for -16. I hear you, Paris, that's my kitty, guys. I probably will set this for -17, but -16 is a good starting point. Then you have right here a resistive L pad. So most L pads have a pot. Pots get dirty, pots get less accurate. These are fixed resistors. The jumper moves it between 4 sets of fixed resistors so that you can have 0 dB of attenuation to the tweeter, meaning full throttle, 2 dB of attenuation, 4 dB, 6 dB, or 8 dB of attenuation. Very often your tweeter is even more efficient than your compression, than your mid-range, and your mid-range is hands and feet more efficient than your woofer. One of the great things that this crossover does, and how you get the speaker to sound as though it's playing with one voice, is you have all of them matched SPL-wise so that they're all more or less equally loud. And in so doing, it sounds like a single voice in harmony rather than 3 desperate drivers speaking all at the same time and you being able to hear each driver. If you can hear a driver individually, that speaker is not well voiced and you need to work on the crossover. So what's really nice is right here, you have a barrier strip and you'll run wire leads from the barrier strip to the individual components. I'll show you that when the speaker's built. This is the brains of the crossover, the brains of the speaker. It crosses over 500 hertz. It crosses, which is from the woofer to the mid-range at 500 hertz. So in my cabinet, this woofer is going to do about 32 to 34 hertz to 500 hertz. It's going to hand over duties at that point, more or less, to the compression driver and the mid-range. And in so doing, this is going to handle from 500 hertz to 5600 hertz. So we're not asking it to do a whole lot. It actually goes up to 20,000 kilohertz, and yet we're stopping at 5600 hertz, meaning this is going to be, it's an ultra wide driver that we're using in a narrow manner to keep it as linear as we can. So we're not using the horn to its fullest ability, nor the driver, but we're going to have it the most well-behaved, most controlled, agile, good sounding we can because of it. Lastly, you have your tweeter. Your tweeter picks up at 5600 hertz all the way up to 20,000 kilohertz, and it does this with ease. Because if you remember, on the low side, this driver can go all the way down to 1200 hertz. I'm never going to ask it to do 1200 hertz by asking it to only do 5600 hertz. We're not stressing the diaphragm of the driver, and it's going to work perfect. So, a few other pieces of the puzzle to talk about. Woofers. So this is an Eminence 12 LFA, and you can consider it interchangeable for any Heresy woofer if you need it to be, or even in the Jubilee, which has two of these in parallel. It is a workhorse of a PA driver, meaning you can put lots of power through it. It takes a licking, keeps on ticking, and won't get hurt. Has a pleated surround. And when you see it actually being used, you will never see the driver have any excursion. You're not going to see that moving. It's so fast and there's so little excursion. You're not really pushing this driver hard at all. Relatively inexpensive. So let's talk about, so if you guys see how we do this, we solder on our leads here. We put a zip tie with a wire relief right here, a strain relief right here, so that no matter what happens, I'm never going to fatigue my solder joint. So even if I pull really, really hard here, it's going to hit these two junction points before it ever hit my solder joint. So I'm never going to crack a solder joint. This is a durable connection. And if you see, I'll try to show you this more carefully. These are forked terminals, spade terminals, and they actually cant upwards slightly. So once they go underneath the screw terminal, they don't pop out, and you can screw them down and they stay in place really well. We crimp and then we solder behind it to fill the crimp. It's just how we do things. And in a perfect world, that's how you'd want to do it. Lastly, last component, not a big deal to most people. I like big chunky binding posts. I don't use banana connectors because banana connectors lose tension over time. And if you use gear a lot and undo, redo, fiddle, fart, and play with your speaker, adjust it, tune it, try to understand it, you're gonna lose the tension on those cables, and that's not helpful for anybody. So what do? We use this binding post. You get it from Parts Express, relatively inexpensive, and we use these binding post. So this is a binding post plate. It's metal. You can't crack it, and we use these binding posts. These binding posts have a keyway inscribed into the plastic insulator that doesn't allow the binding post to rotate. So no matter how hard you wrench down on this, you're either going to fail the whole component mechanically, but you're never really going to be able to make this move, not unless you get like a set of channel locks and rotate it down on it. Even with my bare paws and using an extra set of fingers to torque down on it, I couldn't rotate this, and that's why I choose it. So we solder in the back. Now, to get solder on the speaker terminals and to get solder on the binding posts, we scratch off the coating, because typically they have a coating that makes it really hard to solder to. So you just get a file, scratch it off on the binding posts because they have like an anti-corrosion coating. Same for the binding posts. We use the Metcal solder station and Carta solder, and in it goes. So I also take, there is a drill bit called a Forstner bit or a hole saw, depending on what you have access to. You can buy it on Amazon. I get an 1.5-inch hole saw, and I drill a hole right in the center here where it would be. It goes through the back plate of the speaker. Once through the back plate of the speaker, obviously wires get fished through. We put a zip tie here so that even if it fell down and it pulled, we're never going to pull onto our solder joint. We're actually going to pull onto where it's physically secured by the zip tie. So here is pretty much the totality of the speaker as you see it, ready with all the components ready to be installed. Next video you see, I will have it ready, everything installed, and try to walk you guys through the little things that we did to make it a better install.